The sun was beginning to lean against the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. For Eli, the cowboy, this time of day used to be his favorite. It was a quiet moment to watch the land he loved settle in for the night. But now, the quiet felt heavy and empty. Inside the small, sturdy ranch house, the only sounds were the soft crackle of the fireplace and two tiny, fussing cries. In a wooden cradle near the hearth lay his whole world, his newborn twins, Jack and Lily. They were so small, and every day since they had arrived, Eli had felt a mix of overwhelming love and a fear that was colder than a winter stream. Just a few weeks ago, the house had been filled with a different kind of warmth. His wife's laughter would dance from the kitchen, and she would hum old songs while mending his work shirts. But a sudden fever had taken her from them, leaving a silence so deep Eli felt he could drown in it. He had promised her he would keep their babies safe, a promise he held on to like a lifeline. He learned to change their diapers, his big, rough hands fumbling with the tiny cloths. He learned to swaddle them tightly, the way she had shown him, so they felt secure. But there was one problem he could not solve, a problem that grew more desperate with every passing hour. Their cow, Bessie, a gentle brown creature who was usually a reliable friend, had gone dry. No matter how patiently Eli tried, no warm milk came for the babies. The small supply of canned milk from town was gone, and the twins were hungry. Their little cries, which started as whimpers, were growing stronger and more urgent. Jack's face would turn red, and Lily would wave her tiny fists in the air. Seeing them so upset made Eli's heart ache with a helplessness he had never known. He felt as if he were failing his very first and most important job as a father. With a deep breath that did little to calm the worry in his chest, he pulled on his heavy coat and set his worn hat on his head. He gave the cradle one last, long look before stepping out into the cool evening air. His horse, Scout, waited patiently by the fence. Eli saddled him up, the movements familiar and comforting. "We have to try, boy," he whispered, patting Scout's neck. The ride to town felt longer than usual. Each step of the horse's hooves seemed to echo the ticking clock in his mind. The twins needed to eat, and he was their only hope. He pushed Scout to go a little faster, his eyes fixed on the dim lights of the small town in the distance, praying that the general store would have what he needed. The ride back from town was a blur of disappointment and growing fear. The storekeeper's apologetic words, "Supply wagons delayed by the storm, Eli." Not a drop to be had, echoed in his mind, mixing with the memory of his baby's hungry cries. By the time the dark shape of his ranch house appeared against the gloomy sky, the wind had picked up, carrying the wet, metallic smell of coming rain. Eli tended to Scout in the barn with a heavy heart, giving the loyal horse an extra scoop of oats as if trying to care for something, since he felt he was failing his own children. He hurried into the house just as the first heavy drops of rain began to tap dance on the wooden roof. Inside, the fire he had banked before leaving was burning low, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He rushed to the cradle. Jack and Lily were awake, their fussing having turned into full, miserable wails. Their little faces were scrunched and red, their tiny bodies tense. Eli's heart felt like a stone in his chest. He tried giving them a little sugared water from a cloth, a trick he'd heard of, but they would not have it. They turned their heads away, their cries growing more frantic, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the lonely house. He paced the floor, holding one and then the other, rocking them gently, humming a tune his wife used to sing, but nothing worked. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in his heart. Thunder rumbled, a deep, angry sound, and lightning flashes lit up the windows like sudden, terrifying daylight. The wind held around the corners of the house, and the rain began to fall in sheets, pounding on the roof like 1,000 frantic drummers. Eli felt utterly alone, trapped with his worry, the storm screaming what he felt inside, that he was not enough. It was in the middle of this chaos, with a clap of thunder so loud it shook the windows, that another sound, entirely unexpected, cut through the noise. It was a sound that did not belong to the storm. It was a firm, yet hesitant, knock at the front door. Eli froze, holding a sobbing Lily against his shoulder. Who could possibly be out on a night like this? For a wild moment, he thought he had imagined it, but then it came again, a little louder this time, 3 sharp raps. Cautiously, he crossed the room, his boots sounding loud on the floorboards. He unlatched the heavy wooden door and pulled it open, a gust of wind and rain immediately spraying into the room. There, silhouetted against a flash of lightning, stood a woman. She was soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, and her simple dress clinging to her shivering frame. Water streamed from her clothes, forming a small puddle at her feet. In one hand, she held a small, covered metal pail, gripping its handle tightly as if it were a great treasure. Her eyes, wide and a little frightened, met his. "Please," she said, her voice trembling from the cold, "my wagon, the wheel broke in the mud just down the road. I saw your light. May I please come in and wait out this storm?" She then lifted the pail slightly, as if remembering something very important. "I was taking this to my sister, it's milk from my own cow. Perhaps you might have a use for it?" In the cradle behind him, Lily let out a particularly piercing cry, as if to answer her question. For a moment, Eli could only stand there, the wind whipping rain into the doorway, his mind struggling to catch up with the impossible sight before him. The woman's words, "I was taking this to my sister, it's milk," seemed to hang in the air, a lifeline thrown to him in the middle of a stormy sea. The frantic cries of his babies, which had been a source of such despair, now felt like a guiding prayer that had been answered. He quickly stepped back, his manners returning. Come in, miss," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, get out of the weather." He ushered the shivering woman inside, latching the door firmly against the raging night. His first thought was for the precious pail. He took it from her with a care usually reserved for newborn lambs, his hands almost trembling. The woman, introducing herself as Annie, stood dripping by the fire, trying to wring out the hem of her dress. Eli's movements became a blur of purposeful action. He found a small, clean pot and poured the rich, fresh milk into it, placing it carefully at the edge of the hearth to warm. The simple, wholesome smell of it filled the room, a stark contrast to the scent of damp wool and desperation. As he waited, he fetched a dry blanket for Annie, his gratitude making him clumsy. When the milk was ready, he dipped a corner of a clean cloth into it, letting it soak. He knelt by the cradle and lifted Jack first, gently bringing the cloth to the baby's lips. The little boy, after a moment of surprise, began to suckle eagerly, his angry cries ceasing into soft, contented gulps. A feeling of relief so powerful it made Eli's eyes sting washed over him. He repeated the process with Lily, who also quieted, her tiny body relaxing in his arms as she drank. The silence that settled over the room was not empty or lonely anymore, it was peaceful, filled only by the crackling fire and the sound of the rain on the roof. Once the twins were fed, swaddled, and sleeping deeply for the first time all evening, Eli turned his attention fully to his guest. He insisted she take the chair closest to the fire while he prepared a simple stew from what he had in the pantry. As they ate, Annie explained more of her story. She had been living on a small homestead a day's travel away, but after her father passed, she had decided to join her sister in the next town over. Her entire life was packed into that stranded wagon. Eli, in turn, found himself speaking of things he had kept locked inside, his wife's passing, the deep loneliness of the ranch, and his fierce determination to raise Jack and Lily right. It was the first real conversation he'd had in weeks, and it felt like balm on a wound. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. Eli went out to find Annie's wagon, its back wheel deeply mired in mud and splintered beyond a quick fix. He brought his tools and, with Annie handing him what he needed, he worked for most of the morning to repair it. During a break, Annie walked over to the small barn. She looked at Bessie, the dry cow, thoughtfully. "My pa had a cow who went dry once," she said. She showed Eli how to mix a mash of warm water, crushed oats, and a little molasses, explaining that sometimes a cow needed a little extra comfort and good food to let her milk flow again. It was a small thing, a piece of knowledge he'd never had, but it felt like a giant step forward. Over the next few days, a new rhythm settled on the ranch. Annie stayed, insisting on earning her keep. She showed Eli how to bathe the twins without them fussing, her touch sure and gentle. She sang to them while she mended a tear in Eli's good shirt, and the sound of a woman's voice in the house made it feel like a home again. Eli, in turn, showed her the best grazing spots and how he liked the fences mended. They worked side by side, and the quiet ranch began to feel not just cared for, but truly lived in, its rooms filled with a warmth that had been missing for a long, long time. The days melted into one another, each sunrise bringing a new kind of rhythm to the ranch, a rhythm filled with purpose and a quiet, growing joy. The wagon, now repaired and sturdy, stood by the barn, a silent question that neither Eli nor Annie seemed in a hurry to answer. Under Annie's care, Bessie the cow, nourished by the special mash, had begun to give milk again, a steady, creamy supply that meant no one would ever go hungry. Jack and Lily were thriving, their cries now more often sounds of simple fussiness than desperate need, and their faces were growing round and happy. They would watch Annie with wide, curious eyes, and a gurgling laugh had started to escape Lily's lips whenever Annie would play a simple game of peekaboo with her. The sound was like music, a melody that filled the entire house. One evening, with the chores all done and the last light of day painting the sky in soft, gentle colors, Eli found Annie sitting on the porch, watching the stars begin to appear. The twins were asleep in their cradle inside, full and content. Eli sat beside her, the old wooden boards of the porch creaking softly under his weight. For a few minutes, they sat in a comfortable silence, listening to the crickets begin their nightly song. Eli's heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a hopeful kind of nervousness. He had practiced the words in his head while mending fences and while riding the range, but now they felt jumbled and clumsy. "Annie," he began, his voice a little rough. He cleared his throat. "This ranch, it's seen a lot of sadness. But since you arrived, you've brought the sunshine back. You've shown me how to be a better father, and you've given these babies a comfort I couldn't give them alone." He paused, gathering his courage. "I know you have a life to get to with your sister. But the truth is, this place feels like it's yours, too. It feels right with you here. The babies, and me, we'd be mighty proud if you'd consider staying. Not as a guest, but as part of this family." He held his breath, looking at her in the dim light, hoping she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Annie turned to him, and he could see her eyes were shining with unshed tears, but a warm smile was spreading across her face. She placed a hand gently on his. "Eli," she said softly, "my old home was just a place. It was filled with memories, but my future wasn't there. When my wagon broke down, I thought it was a piece of bad luck. But now I see it was the best thing that ever could have happened. This ranch, these babies, you, it feels like I've finally come home. I can't imagine any other place I'd rather be." Relief washed over Eli like a warm wave, and he smiled, a true, full smile that reached his eyes for the first time in many months. Right there on the porch, under the blanket of 1,000 twinkling stars, they made a new promise to each other, a promise to face the future together, to build a life filled with love and shared work on the land they both cherished. And so, the cowboy's lonely heart was filled, not just with the memory of a past love, but with the bright, steady promise of a new one. The story of Eli and Annie is a reminder that sometimes, hope arrives not with a shout, but with a quiet knock in the middle of a storm. Their life on the ranch was just beginning, a new chapter waiting to be written with every sunrise. If you enjoyed this tale of a family found and a new beginning forged from hardship, there are many more stories like it waiting to be discovered. To join us on our next adventure, be sure to subscribe for more.